All right, we're back. Welcome. We have a number of agencies to budget with their budget hearings today. We'll start with payments to civil divisions. Ms. Rai is our analyst. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the members of the committee. I am Yashodhara Rai, and I'll be presenting the fiscal 26 budget analysis for payments to civil divisions of the state. This portion, sorry. Hello. Okay. This portion of the budget is comprised of 3 items: disparity grants to low wealth jurisdictions based on a formula set in statute, grants to mitigate the impact of the local assumption of a portion of teacher retirement costs. These amounts are set in statute, and gaming grants to Calvert County. As shown here on page 1, the fiscal 26 budget decreases by $25.8 million. This is after accounting for a contingent reduction in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, BRFA, of 2025 as introduced, which we will discuss later in the analysis. On page 2, Exhibit 1 shows each county's various grant amounts in fiscal 26 allowance after accounting for the contingent reduction. The second column lists the disparity grant amount that each county receives, and the third column is the amount provided to local school boards to supplement their assumption of a portion of teacher retirement costs. On page 3, Exhibit 2 shows that general fund in fiscal 26 declines by $25.8 million. Of this, $11.9 million is attributable to the net decrease in disparity grants. Counties receiving an increase in fiscal 26 disparity grant amounts are Somerset, Washington, and Wicomico, while the grant amount decreases for Caroline, Dorchester, Garrett, and Prince George's counties. The remaining decrease of $13.8 million is attributable to the reduction in the mandated appropriation for the teacher retirement supplemental grants, which is contingent on enactment of the BRFA. Page 4 highlights the proposed BRFA provision as introduced. Exhibit 3 shows that this BRFA provision reduces the teacher retirement supplemental grant mandated appropriation from $27.7 million to $13.8 million in fiscal 26. Also, another BRFA provision repeals the mandated appropriation to this grant starting fiscal 27. This grant was established in fiscal 2013 to offset costs related to teacher pension shifting to local jurisdictions and to assist local jurisdictions with the transition. According to the Department of Budget and Management, local jurisdictions have had sufficient time to make accommodations for these costs over the years, and the grants phase out takes into consideration the local jurisdictions need to plan for these costs. Page 5 provides a brief background on the disparity grants, which are state funding targeted at the difference in counties' abilities in raising revenue from their local income tax. Counties with per capita local tax revenues less than 75% of the statewide per capita local tax revenue are eligible for grants in the amount of the difference between their revenue and 75% of the statewide average. There is a soft cap on the grant based on the county's 2010 grant amount and the county's tax rate. On page 6, Exhibit 4 shows the disparity grant calculation under current law for fiscal 26. The total fiscal 26 grant amount lowers to approximately $177 million from $188 million in fiscal 25. The tax rates for Anne Arundel and Frederick counties are noted various, because they adopted graduated income tax brackets starting tax year 2023. Details on these graduated income tax brackets can be found in Appendix 2 on pages 10 and 11. Page 7 describes the adoption of the graduated income tax brackets that was established by Chapter 23 of the 2021 special session. The legislation requires all local governments to impose a minimum tax rate of 2.25% and a maximum rate of 3.2%. It also authorizes local governments to impose graduated county income tax. In the 2024 JCR, the committees requested a report from DBM on the Office of the Comptroller on how the minimum state grant would be calculated for jurisdictions with graduated income tax rates. The agencies propose using an effective gross tax rate, which is calculated by dividing income tax revenues by pre-tax earnings, and also noted that the effective gross tax rate would be reported in the annual income tax summary report beginning tax year 2023. The effective gross tax rates for Anne Arundel and Frederick counties for tax year 2023 are 2.76% and 2.9% respectively. The agencies also noted that currently no change to statute is required. On page 8 is DLS's recommendation to concur with the governor's allowance. Pages 9 to 13 are appendices, and this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for an excellent analysis. Are there any questions for the analyst? All right, Secretary Grady, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Barnes and members of the committee. My name is Helene Grady. I'm Secretary of Budget and Management, and with me today is Nathan Bowen, Executive Director of our Office of Budget Analysis. We very much appreciate the thorough analysis put forward by our DLS analyst. We don't have anything to add to the analysis. The analyst did not have any questions or recommendations for DBM, and so with that, we're happy to take any questions that you have.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being with us. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Now let's move forward with public debt. Mr. Frank.
Okay, the first page of the public debt analysis provides a summary of what the public debt is. This is the debt service for the state's general obligation bonds, which pays for the state's capital program. On page 1 at the bottom, you can see the standard exhibit we have about spending in the current year, the past year, and in the upcoming allowance. What's unusual about this is that the debt service costs are less in 2026 than in 2025. This is uncommon. The reason for this is twofold: one backwards looking, one forwards looking. Regarding the backwards looking, there were some very large issuances in 2010. It's 15-year debt. The 15 years are over in 2026, and so they fall off the books. Moving forward, there seems to be a slowing of issuances in recent years, and so we've been not issuing as much, and therefore the costs are increasing less than we had anticipated in the past. And so there is a discussion about that later in the analysis. On page, I'm going to skip to page 3 now. This is, I'm not going to go through this, but this is a listing of all the different kinds of GO debt that the Treasurer's Office is authorized to issue. Page 4, exhibit number 1, shows the pie chart of spending. And in this case, this is an account which pays debt service, so that the key numbers really are the principal and the interest. As you can see, the principal is 70% and interest is 30%. So this is quite low, and the reason for that is that the state's debt is constitutionally limited to 15 years, and so we pay it down more quickly and pay less interest cost. If this were with 30-year bonds, typically it's about 50-50 between principal and interest. So this is the good news is we're paying it down quicker. The bad news is we have, in the short term, we've got some bigger costs in principal payments. Page 5, exhibit number 2 shows what the 2026 allowance is. As you can see, about 3/4 of the way down the page, there's a subtotal that totals to $1,399,000,000. That is the debt service on everything that's already been issued. So that's essentially a fixed cost at this moment. There is also debt to be issued. The estimate that DLS is using is consistent with the State Treasurer's Office, which is that $900 million will be issued in June of 2025. The interest rate estimate on that is 5%. We have estimate $42 million in interest in 2026 for that. The reason I said the prior debt is fixed for now is because it is, but there is an opportunity to refund because the state issues callable bonds. They're callable after 10 years. The estimate is that there will be an opportunity to refund, and DLS estimates that if a level savings is taken over the life of the remaining bonds that are called, then we get about $5 million a year in savings. And so then I'm taking that off of the allowance amount, and so that's how we get to $1,435 million for the 2026 debt service estimate. On page 6, Exhibit 3 shows that there is a difference between our estimate and the estimate of the Department of Budget and Management, and this Exhibit 3 explains what that difference is. First of all, DBM is assuming that the bond sale will be $1,350 million. This was the estimate in the fall of 2024. We're using a more recent estimate. So then, because of that, we expect $27.5 million less of debt service. The second factor is, and I'll discuss, there is a section on this about the bond sale later that goes into more detail. But for now, so that you know where the numbers come from and why they're different, the refunding can be done to one of two ways are most common. You can do what's called the level savings, and that is you spread the savings out over the 5 years or 6 years that that was refunded, or you can just do upfront savings and just take all of the savings in the first year and get no savings in the out years. And DBM's approach is they have the upfront savings, but we're recommending, for a number of reasons we'll talk about later, that we do the level savings. We think that's a better long-term approach. Page 4 shows the forecast for fiscal 2025 through 2030. And key things about this, I would say, key lines is one is the state property tax is the main revenue source for GO bond debt service payments. It's about $1,114 million is the estimate in 2026. That's about 78% of the debt service cost. The rest of it is made up from premiums from prior bond sales that we can use. Also some general funds, $182 million is being used. And there is some fund balance that we have also from the prior years. And as you can see, the forecast is that the debt service and property tax revenues will grow, but debt service a little more. And also I would point out that there's a $10 million end of year balance is assumed. So this forecast, these assumptions are consistent with DBM. And so that does leave a little bit of room in case we're short a few million dollars in one of the years. I'm going to go now to page 8, exhibit number 5. This is about the housing market, and the reason the housing market is important is because the state property tax pays for 3/4 of the debt service that we have. As you can see from this exhibit, the costs of, and which probably everybody in this room knows, is the costs have been, or home values have been increasing in recent years. They haven't been as stark as it was about 15, 20 years ago when there was the housing boom, but they are steadily increasing, and we're noticing that in the revenues. Also, there has been a decline in inventory, which probably everybody, I would imagine, knows this too. One of the issues that when you read about that, you hear, is that there's a lot of people that have very low fixed rate mortgages, and they are reluctant to leave them, and that's one reason that's been cited for the inventories growth or declines, I guess I should say, in the inventory that's out there. Page 9 has exhibit number 6. This kind of shows two trends. One is what does 1 penny per sales tax get us? That's the revenues, and as you can see, that's increasing steadily. The second is the dotted line. That's what's called the homestead tax credit, and that's a tax credit that we have in Maryland, in which the annual increase of a home's taxes can only increase by 10% a year. So if you're increasing by more than 10%, you get a credit for that, and you don't have to pay that. As a forecaster, I really like that, because it's a built-in hedge that if there's a big boom and then a big bust there is kind of a delay in it, because what you're doing is when prices then decline, first, what you're doing is you're just reducing those, the credits are disappearing and not revenue is disappearing. And that explains why if you go to the homestead tax credit values peaked around 2008 when property values peaked before the Great Recession. But if you notice the per penny, that did not start declining until 3 years later. And the reason for that is that homestead tax credit is kind of insulated the state from a quick and sudden drop in revenues. Another point I would make about this was interesting is, yes, we've seen an increase in home values, and an increase in the homestead credit, but it's nowhere near as much as it was back in that period 15, 20 years ago. And the final annuity bond fund exhibit is on page 10. It's exhibit number 7. And it just shows the difference between the two key numbers in this account. And the first is the debt service that has to get paid, and the second is the state property taxes. The debt service is expected to grow faster. Property taxes are about 78% in fiscal 2026 and 70% of debt service cost in 2030. And now I'll move on to the issues. The first issue has to do with Moody's Investor Service. We did get a AAA rating at the most recent bond sale, but also it was a negative outlook was given. And this issue kind of discusses what has been said about that to update the committee so that you're aware of our credit rating. The first point is Moody's has been changing their methodology. All of them have been to make it more quantifiable, and they're relying more on numbers, and it's a larger share of their rating is that. Coupled with that is they're looking at the state's finances, and they are aware. We publish this all the time. We update it regularly that there is a long-term general fund forecast, and when it's good, we say it's good, and when it's not good, we say it's not good. And so the concern is that our forecast deficit is getting a bit large, and that is concerning the rating agencies. In the short term, there really wasn't a lot noticed from that sale. I would say just an observation is that in July of 2011, there was a situation in which Maryland was also given a negative outlook. This was at a time in which the federal government was debating its budget, and there was concern about federal default, and states with very high, or rely heavily, I should say, on the federal government. Five of them were put on negative watch. Virginia, I think New Mexico, Tennessee, and I can't remember who else was there. And so at that time, actually through regression analysis, it looked like about 23 basis points or 0.23% higher was what was paid on that bond sale immediately after that. And that happened like maybe within 2 weeks of the sale. And so that had a very stark effect, but this one didn't seem to have the same effect. Over time, we'll see what this means. We may get taken off of outlook soon too if everything goes well. So we're just, bottom line is this can have an effect. We're monitoring what that is, and it's unclear at this time what it is. Another issue is this has to do with the ratios. One of the reasons one of the issues with the ratios is Maryland is a high debt state. And to show what I mean by that, if you go to page 12 to exhibit number 8, what this shows is in the column on your left shows all of the states that are AAA rated by the bond rating agencies from all 3 major rating agencies. What the numbers in there is what your rank is nationally, so from 1 to 50. This doesn't have territories or the District of Columbia, but the 50 states are all in here. And a high number means you have a high level of liabilities, and a low number means you have low liabilities. What I've also done is I've shaded Maryland so that you can find Maryland easily. And in all cases where there was a state with higher relative liabilities than Maryland, I shaded that also. You can see Maryland is first or second in most of the categories here. For example, all long-term liabilities to revenues, debt to personal income, debt service to revenues, these kinds of, and also the pension liability. Now, the Moody's did a few things to try to make these numbers more comparable to each other. And there's I should mention also that Moody's considers lottery debt to be state debt. The reason for that is twofold. For one thing is that the state debt, it really does, lottery debt is there to replace, I guess the easy way to describe it, lottery debt generally funds things that the state cares about, and it goes into the general fund. And so it does fund a lot of state activities. Also, lottery debt is an advantage of lottery debt is it reduces your need to do other raise state taxes and things like that. And so there is kind of a relationship there that lottery really is very well integrated into the state's finances. And so their opinion is that this should be state debt. The second thing that they do is, as I mentioned earlier, we sell 15-year bonds, some states sell 30-year bonds. What they've done is normalized the maturity period so that they assume all bonds are recalculated so that they're 20-year bonds, so that we don't get penalized, in this case, for having higher debt service payments and states because it is actually a good policy to do that and say that they want to make apples to apples comparisons here. And finally, within pensions, one of the issues with pensions is what's the rate of return, and they've also used a consistent rate of return across all pension funds. And so there some attempts were made to make this data more comparable. Next point about this is on page 13 is a discussion is there haven't been lots of stadium authority debt has been issued in recent years, and that is also affecting our numbers. And on pages 13 and 14, you can see what's been authorized since 2019. The final point I think I should make about this is exhibit number 9, and that is that there are a lot of liabilities that clearly are state debt, and there are a lot of liabilities that clearly are not state debt, but there is a gray area in the middle. And what this exhibit shows is how the three major rating agencies, how their comparisons compare with our CDAC comparison. And so the bottom line is ours, we do have the way we count less debt than the other rating agencies do. And there's a number of things I already mentioned that, like the lottery revenues, for example. Fitch also counts the public-private partnerships, the state debt, and there's a list of all. I don't want to go through the whole list right now, but 15 and 16 shows a list of some of the differences between how they calculate it and how the state calculates it. So end of the issue, page 16, 3 things about it I'll quickly say. First is, what can we do to not have a negative outlook? The first is comply with the Spending Affordability Committee's goal to make eliminate the structural deficit in 2026. Second, we would say avoid any large issuances, or new authorizations and things like that. And finally, maybe we should review the debt. There's some things that I think there's a strong case can be made that this really is state debt, and we may want to do a review like that. The second issue is on page 17. That's really kind of a sense of where are we with the impending bond sale. I'll go first to page 18, exhibit number 10. This shows the 10-year Treasury note rates since 1962. That's the oldest series I could find. 10 years is a good year because even though we sell 15-year bonds, the average maturity is 10 years, so that fits nicely with ours. And as you can see, where the red line is where the rate was in January when I did prepare this exhibit, and the blue lines is what the rate has been over time. And basically 63% of the time, interest rates over this period have been higher than they are now. That said, since 2008, most of the time the interest rates have been lower. So the glass is half full if you have a 60-year perspective, and it's half empty if you have a 15-year perspective on the interest rates. More recently, page 19, exhibit number 11, shows what recent bond sales interest rates have been. Those are the black bars there. The red line on top is what the assumed interest rates that we use in our analysis and in our forecasting. It's 5%, and it's been that for decades. And so if we and what happens if that interest rate comes in at less than 5%, then that reduces our forecast in the out years and also would reduce the needs in 2026. And finally, the other two lines, the blue and the yellow, are indices showing where one is from municipal bonds and the other is the 10-year Treasury note again. And generally, we are below all those things. If you look at where we are right now, some of the indices, the one I would most pay attention to is the yellow line, because that's a municipal index. If we get above 5%, then the other opposite happens, and we would have to pay more debt service than is anticipated in the budget. It doesn't look at this point like we'll be there. We've still got over a half a percentage point to go to get there, but we're much closer than we have been in the past. And but at this point, there's no reason to believe that we will be paying more than 5%. Okay, what does this mean for the bond sale? There's kind of a couple of things going on in the bond sale. The first, as I just said, is the 5% interest rate assumption reasonable? The answer is yes. Secondly, the premiums are very volatile. We don't know where that's going to end up. And as you can see, those lines bounced all over the place. So those premium numbers could be quite different than we anticipate, or not. It's hard to say. And finally, back to what I talked about earlier, is the refunding bonds that I mentioned earlier. We have a refunding sale. I had said DLS anticipates 5.5% savings from that. If you go to page 21 to Exhibit 12, you can see 3 scenarios that the Treasurer's Office ran for how we would, in a sense, from an accounting sense, how we would apply the savings that we have. As I mentioned earlier, the level savings approach is over the full period. The advantage is it's the largest savings in a cash basis and also in a present value basis. So it is, and that's most commonly used. Another approach is upfront savings. As far as I know, the state has only done that once before, and that was in July of 2020 during the pandemic, when there was a real concern about cash flow. And at that point, it said, we don't know what's going to happen next. We need as much cash as we can get. And so the decision was made to do upfront savings. It was a reasonable decision, I think, at the time, considering where we were. You know, it's one of those things. It was a good decision, but the outcome, you know, turns out the pandemic, the cash problem never materialized, but at least we were ready for it. And the final one, I'm not even, this is more of, I think, just intellectual curiosity, is you could defer savings to make even more early savings, but then you end up paying more, and it's the least efficient of the approaches. DLS recommends level savings, a couple of reasons. First of all, most value. Secondly, the structural deficit is more than 1 year. It's over a period of years, and this gets you savings throughout the whole deficit period, structural deficit, the forecast period, I should say. Also, there's a short-term risk issue. If you get only half as much of savings as you think, you go from 15 or 30 million to 15, and you lose 15. If you only get half as much for level savings, you lose only $2 to $3 million a year. And so in the short term, there's less of a risk. And also we've had some. So there's a $10 million fund balance also. And so the level savings, even if there is no refunding, we still have enough money in the account to pay for the debt service. The third issue that I have has to do with our bond sale calendar. And basically, the first thing I want to say is, if you go to page 22 on Exhibit 13, you can see in the past we generally had 2 bond sales a year. The reason for this is there's some advantages to it. First of all, like on the cost side of things, there's kind of a U-shaped curve that gets you like a sweet spot to how big your sale ought to be. If your sale is too small, you're spreading too many fixed costs over smaller amount of bonds, and harder to market. As it gets larger, the interest rate costs go down. Eventually, if your sale gets too large, then costs go back up again. As they become harder to market, you have less people potentially bidding on it, because the sale is so big that there's fewer potential bidders and things like that. And so the idea is to find the sweet spot at a billion. We're doing $1.3 billion sales. Those are pretty big sales. Maybe instead of doing 1 a year, doing two a year could generate some savings. Second issue that we have is that there is a risk in the timing of a bond sale. Bond sales are put together, decided months ahead of time. You have to get the rating agencies. There's a lot of legal documentation you have to put together. And as such, it takes a good while, and you plan ahead of time. And just a couple of quick examples, as I mentioned one earlier, was that July bond sale from 2011. That was really not a good time to sell bonds. So sometimes you lose. Sometimes it was impossible to know at that time that what would be happening in federal government. Opposite end, March 4th, 2020, we had a bond sale. It was just at the beginning of the pandemic. Rates were cheap, and it was a great time to have a sale. We're also lucky in that. I remember afterwards talking to the Treasurer's office and saying, well, because when the pandemic really hit and it was clear what was going on, it was markets went haywire, and so it was very difficult to sell and very risky to sell. I'm asking them, and they said at the time that if the sale would have been scheduled, say, later in March, early April, they may have canceled the sale, or probably would have, and waited for a better, less risky time to do that. I mean, our concern also with doing June bond sales is if you got to get the sale in the fiscal year, you don't have a lot of time if you want to delay the sale and do something else. And so we really think going to 2 bond sales is helpful. A third reason is it's inconsistent estimates. If there's a March sale, then you all know what the debt service costs are, and there's not a lot of risk next year with the budget anymore. But with this, there still are there's a lot of debt. It could, if the sale isn't what we think it is, then that could change things, and there could be deficiencies and things like that. So final issue, I'm going to go through it really quickly. It's just, it has an exhibit on page 25. This has to do with authorizations and issuances. The GO bond authorizes the GO bond bill authorizes GO bonds. The state treasurer issues them when we need the cash. The reason for the delay is construction costs sometimes take years to materialize, and so the state cash flows issuances. In recent years, what's happened, as you can kind of see, is annual issuances have been kind of low. Also, the key thing is what's unissued debt as a share of the total debt, and that's increased. And so what this suggests is that we're issuing less, and we're piling up more of this unissued debt on our books. So what DLS is suggesting is that there be a study commission that kind of looks at this between, let's say, DBM, Treasurer's Office, DLS, Controller's Office, and to kind of see maybe we should reconsider how we are estimating this. The estimates that we have are over 30 years old, and lots changed. With that, I'll go to the recommended action page. 3 things already. The first is, as I've already discussed, at $2.9 million, we have more debt service than we need. I recommend a $2.9 million reduction. Recommend a policy to have back to 2 sales a year, and finally, a study group to look at issuances. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Frank, for the great analysis, as always. Questions for the analyst? Okay, our treasurer's with us. Mr. Treasurer, welcome. You and your team, come on up. Nice to see you, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. To my right is Ms. Rebecca Ruff, and to her right is my Chief Deputy, Jonathan Martin. Let me start by saying a special note of thanks to Mr. Frank and the Department of Legislative Services for indeed an excellent analysis. In the interest of time, you all have my more detailed written testimony, so we'll just try to hit a couple of quick highlights and take any questions that you may have. The bottom line is that I would ask the committee, with a few notable exceptions, to concur with the Department of Legislative Services recommendations for the proposed public debt budget for fiscal year 2026. This past June, my office successfully helped the state issue over $1 billion in general obligation bonds. We received interest from a combined 8 major banks, achieving favorable pricing with an all-true interest of 3.37%, and earned over $150 million in premium to support the capital program. Prior to the sale, we hosted analysts from the 3 major rating agencies for in-person visits to Maryland for the first time in over a decade. This collaborative effort among fiscal leaders, including Speaker Jones, President Ferguson, and others, in the wake of the Key Bridge collapse, helped secure a continued AAA rating from 3 rating agencies. As was noted earlier, Moody's, however, assigned the state a negative outlook. It's no secret that all three rating agencies have been monitoring Maryland's credit more closely as our fiscal outlook has evolved and their own internal rating interests have changed. The concerns raised by the rating agencies, as mentioned above, a high debt burden, close nexus to the federal government, sizable structural budget gap, are serious and require some responsive actions from the state to continue to protect our highly regarded AAA rating. My office maintains regular contact with the state's rating analyst, sharing a plethora of information that Maryland is well known for producing. We look forward to collaborating with the General Assembly and the governor as the state moves through the budget process and crafts a plan that continues to uphold the quality of Maryland's credit. Now, in terms of the DLS recommendations, I have two comments on it. First, a recommendation number one, DLS estimate a fiscal 2026 debt service appropriation that varies from the assumption in the governor's allowance. Again, we have a more detailed response here, but what I would say is that at a time when markets are particularly volatile, I request that you also provide access to supplemental funding from the rainy day fund in case it is needed to backfill the appropriation. This would only be needed if the final sale outcome varies from expectations, but it is a prudent step to take in these uncertain economic times. Second, recommendation number two requests that my office return to the policy of having multiple annual bond sales if total issuances exceed $700 million. Obviously, it's our job to execute the will of the General Assembly, and we will certainly do that. But I would say that it should be noted that there are a range of factors to take in consideration when constructing a bond sale, including cost efficiencies, financing, feedback from the rating agencies, and capital spending demands. It is difficult to predict the necessary structure and outcome from a sale that is scheduled for several months in advance. The most beneficial support I can receive from you is the ability to be flexible and responsive in structuring our issuance plans. Obviously, I plan to keep the General Assembly and the administration informed as we move forward through the planning process and assumptions evolve. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the public debt budget with you today. And with these two departures from the DLS recommendations, I would ask you to concur with the DLS recommendations. With that, if you have any questions, Mr. Chairman, we would be happy to address them.
Is it? Okay. It's good to see you, sir. See you all.
Thank you very much.
Have a good weekend. Let's move on into the State Retirement Agency. Mr. Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jacob Cash. I'll be presenting the budget analysis for the State Retirement Agency, or SRA. SRA, at the direction of the Board of Trustees, has primary responsibility over the state's retirement systems. The fiscal 2026 allowance is $64.1 million, an increase of $4.6 million from fiscal 2025. The agency is funded through an administrative charge on all employers for whom the agency administers retirement benefits. State agencies account for roughly 1/3 of SRA's funding, while local school boards and governmental units make up the rest of the budget funding. You'll notice that the fund split in the allowance reflects the share of state to local employees in the system, with reimbursable funds approximately half the size of special funds. The investment division is non-budgeted, and that makes up 40% of the allowance. Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows membership in the state's retirement system by active employees and retirees. For the second time since 2010, the number of active members grew by more than the number of retirees, changing the overall composition of membership. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows SRA's call center wait times. The agency has struggled for several years to meet wait time and dropped call goals. In calendar 2024, you can see that wait times grew to an average of 5.5 minutes. SRA attributes the issue primarily to the agency's difficulty in filling and keeping positions filling vacant positions and keeping them filled, as well as slightly above average call volumes during this time period. Exhibit 5 on page 8 compares the fiscal 2026 budget to fiscal 2025. Within the administration division, cost increases are due primarily to statewide cost of living increases. Other large changes are due to retaining senior IT consultants for ongoing system modernization and the end of funding for one-time database server replacements. Moving to the personnel data section on page 9, SRA adds 4 new positions, including a director of diversity, equity, inclusion, and governance as required by Chapter 495 of 2024. SRA is also developing in-house human resources, which have previously been provided by DBM. Related to this change, 2 positions are added, and the budget for shared HR services decreased, and that change is cost neutral. In addition, 4 positions are converted from contractual positions, adding a net of $112,000. SRA vacancies have declined over the past year, but they remain elevated compared to the budgeted turnover. So there is room in the budget to reduce vacancies by about 7 further positions. Moving on to issue 1, which begins on page 11. This regards the system's performance. Exhibit 6 shows the state's investment performance in fiscal 2024 by asset allocation. Total fund performance was 6.93%, and system assets totaled $68.2 billion at the close of the year, representing growth of $3 billion. Exhibit 8 on page 14 compares the system's performance to its benchmarks. Overall, the system beat benchmarks by 59 basis points, or 0.59%, indicating that the system's use of active management is yielding returns above what could be achieved through an indexed or passive approach. Exhibit 10 on page 16 shows the system's funding levels since 2006. The system closed fiscal 2024 with a 72.9% funded ratio of assets to liabilities, the second year-over-year decline in the funded ratio since reforms. The system is now expected to be fully funded by 2039, which is 9 years later than last year. To issue 2 on page 16, at the bottom of this page that exhibit was just on, the budget as introduced proposes to eliminate 2 supplemental appropriations to the pension system. The first is a $50 million supplemental contribution, which is meant to increase that funded ratio of assets to liabilities. The second is a $25 million supplemental contribution, which is called the sweeper, and that is sourced from the general fund's unexpended balance each year. The provisions are both eliminated under the current budget plan, and that funding is removed. There will be more discussion of the sweeper provision in the State Reserve Fund analysis where those funds are actually budgeted. Now moving to issue 3 on page 17. This is regarding consensus legislation. At the time of writing, we didn't know the build number. That build number is HB 107. Is that the right one? Yeah, that's the right one. Consensus legislation proposed by SRA with the support of DBM and DLS would change how administrative fees are budgeted. Administrative fees are currently budgeted in every state agency for their share of costs, and those costs are to be remitted to SRA separately from retirement contributions. However, the consensus legislation would instead add the cost of administration to the retirement contributions each year and pay administrative expenses for SRA directly through the pension trust fund. This would simplify the administrative process for SRA and the budgeting of fees for client agencies. They would have 1 bill versus 2. With this change, the budget as introduced includes a fee holiday on payments in fiscal 2026, which generates savings of $5.7 million in general funds that will be replaced with funds from the pension trust fund. Now moving on to Exhibit 11 on page 18. The current law requires the state to subsidize a share of the employer contribution for local employees in the teachers' retirement systems. The BRFA of 2025 proposes to permanently lower the state subsidy by $97.7 million in fiscal 2026 and each year thereafter. Exhibit 11 shows the cost shift in relation to the overall amount that is provided by the state for this purpose. In conclusion, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you for the analysis. Are there any questions for the analyst? Okay, well, let's welcome up Martin Novin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I come to you today as Chairman of the Board of Trustees for the State Retirement System. As noted, seated next to me is Mr. Martin Novin, the Executive Director of the State Retirement Agency, who has also brought staff to join him. I think they're back there somewhere. Okay. I'd like to commend, again, the budget analyst, Mr. Joseph Guthberlet, for his insightfulness and firm grasp of pension legislation and positive change, both at the agency and with the pension system. In the past few years, since I've become chair of the Board of Trustees, I guess it's been 3 years now, we have welcomed 7 new trustees. They have brought with them excellent oversight and a fresh perspective to both the benefits and investments in the system. At last month's pension board meeting, our chief investment officer, Mr. Andrew Palmer, announced his retirement. He has served as CIO in Maryland since July 2015, close to a decade now, and he will continue to serve as CIO while the board and the Maryland State Retirement Agency conduct a global search for his successor. Andy is slated to step down on June 30th and is working closely with me, the executive director, and our trustees to ensure a smooth transition. Andy is with us here today, I believe. In the back, all right. Andy is here with us today, and on a personal note, I'd like to commend him for serving the people of Maryland these last 10 years. Through his leadership, he has built a well-funded portfolio and paved the way for a more inclusive and prosperous future. So thank you, Andy. And at this time, I'd like to turn to the system's executive director, Mr. Martin Novin.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Good afternoon, Chairman Barnes and members of the committee. I'd like to start by thanking Jacob Cash for his very thorough analysis. We appreciate that, appreciate all your work. We also appreciate that the proposed budget fully funds the system, and we understand that's hard to do. I understand that the Superfund provisions and the reinvested savings were discontinued. We saw that coming, but the fact that in challenging budget times, you're continuing to fully fund the system is essential to our solvency. We very much appreciate you doing that. You may remember I'm from the state in Illinois that took a number of pension holidays when times got tough, and they remain under 50% funded and are having a hard time digging themselves out of that hole. So we never want to get to that position, and I know it takes some discipline and commitment, and we very much appreciate that. And I want to make sure that you realize we know that those aren't easy decisions to make. We also appreciate that the budget provides funding to provide the services to our members that we require. Last year, you provided us with a position to head the member services unit. We do have our new head of member services, Gary Burgess. He's behind us. And he's going to be working to make sure that we control things like the call wait times, which I'm happy to report, have gone down and are now under three minutes per call since the end of the fiscal year. So we're tracking well. A lot of that is because of staffing, and we are fully staffed now, or more fully staffed, closer to fully staffed now in our call center unit. But we're also working on creative ways to make sure that even when we don't retain our staffing levels, that we'll still be able to keep those call times at a reasonable level. But more importantly, we want to make sure that we're using our resources and focusing on proactively engaging with our members and educating them and making sure that we've given them the tools they need to retire with dignity. And that's really the main goal of our push for a broader focus and a more intense focus on member services. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I would like to invite Andy Palmer to join us up here in case you have any questions for him. Any questions for the treasurer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Treasurer, and the team. It's good to see you all. And Mr. Palmer and Martin, we talk regularly. So first, I want to say thank you for your service, sir, to the state of Maryland. Glad to see that some of these positions are moving forward. One of the things that we talk about regularly is how we pipeline people into this industry and how important that is if we're going to continue to see all of Maryland represented in the workforce in high finance. Just want to know if you can talk about that a little bit and the work you guys are doing there for the committee.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you, Chair Barnes, for having me here today. Again, Andrew Palmer, Chief Investment Officer for a few more months here at Maryland Retirement Agency. And to your point, Delegate Lewis, we've been focusing on how to build a strong investment team. Part of the authority that you gave the board 5 years ago to create positions and set compensation for the team allowed us to think about how are we going to build these positions and build the team over time. And what we found was that it was very difficult to identify good candidates from this area. So we've been working to build out a internship program for the last 7 or 8 years where we have local, mostly local students come and join us for the summer, and we've been able to hire some of those students into the program over time. And then we've also looked more deeply into what we call the pipeline of potential employees, and recognized that a lot of the students in this area don't necessarily understand that there is an opportunity to be in the investment industry. And so we've been, some of my staff have been working with some local organizations and national organizations that go into middle schools and high schools and provide financial literacy training, but also investment training. And so many of these programs have longer term scholarship opportunities. And so we're excited to actually have one of the high school students that we've been working with through a program has now joined us as an intern for the summer. So that's a big portion of how we work with those. And we also nationally work with some bigger organizations that have these same programs across the country.
That's wonderful to hear, and I really appreciate that because, as you know, Maryland is the 4th most diverse state in the union. We've talked about this before, and the industry is not the most diverse, right? And the only way we're going to change that is being intentional about making sure everyone is recruited in pipelines such that they can become leaders in the industry. And I think Maryland can be a leader on that, and I know you all believe that. So I'd love to continue supporting you all in pipelines as you go on to retirement, play golf, fish, whatever that is that you're going to do. And those who are still going to be here continue to do the work. Happy to be a partner with you on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chairman. So we've, over the last couple of years, we've hired or filled thousands of empty pins. And I think that there's several hundred new pins in the next, or at least in the governor's proposed budget. Do you think with a lot of these new hires, is that going to put more stress on the pension system in regards to it being completely funded?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So it does both. It does put some stress on the system when we're hiring new pins, but it also broadens the pipeline or the people who are contributing to the pension system. So it helps. It certainly, there's some increased cost when you add salaries, right? And we add the employer contributions that have to be made. But when we have more people contributing to the system, it does bring down the cost, so it kind of mitigates that too. So yes, but not as much as you'd think so.
I would add just to that, there's our actuary projects what they expect compensation increases to be and payroll growth to be. And so really what matters is how different is that from the projections. So that's fair.
Congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you.
When you started here, I think I was chair of pensions. Now you're retiring, I'm still stuck here. So.
Once in pensions, always in pensions. I think that's what Ann Goffert tells me. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right, Ann?
Yeah.
Once,
whatever it is, yes.
yes.
We all do whatever Ann Goffert tells us, so. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for your service.
Thank you, Chairman.
Enjoy your retirement. Good to see you, Mr. Treasurer. We'll move to Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans. Mr. Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans, or MSRP, provides employees with 4 supplemental retirement plan options and funds its operations with a fee on member accounts. MSRP's fiscal 2026 allowance of $2.7 million in special funds is a 9% increase from fiscal 2025, and that is entirely due to an increase in statewide shared services allocation, which supports MSRP's human resources, IT, and other administrative functions. Exhibit 1 on page 2 shows agency spending in fiscal 2026. As you can see, almost 3/4 of spending is for personnel, and other costs mostly are for shared services and contracts, which supports agency activities. The first issue begins on page 4. Chapter 100 of 2023 reestablished the state match program of up to $600 for state employees participating in a supplemental retirement plan. About $12 million in centralized funding has been budgeted in DBM statewide expenses each year since the match was implemented. However, the current budget plan eliminates these centralized funds and requires that agencies find money elsewhere in their budgets to pay for the matches. To be clear, the match is still being offered and paid out, and DLS expects most of these agencies to pay for the match with vacancy savings, fund balance, or other savings that they are able to generate through the year. There's been flexibility provided. Moving to page 5, Exhibit 3 shows MSRP's members and contributing members. The match has driven growth in the program with 9% growth in the number of contributing members since fiscal 2023. While similar growth was predicted in fiscal 2024, MSRP only saw a 2% increase. High growth is predicted in fiscal 2024 and 25 and 26 related to the match, but more specifically related to a departmental bill which would automatically enroll all new state employees while providing an opt-out process. DLS is asking MSRP to comment on how much enrollment is expected to grow barring passage of that auto-enrollment bill, especially considering most recent experience. Moving on to page 6, Exhibit 4 shows plan expenses and revenues. Participant fees are 50 cents per month and 0.11% of assets. The closing balance in fiscal 2024 was 18% of expenses, while the closing balance in fiscal 25 is expected to be 35.8% of expenses, which is above the MSRP's target goal of 25%. Moving to page 7, MSRP plan options gained 16.2% in fiscal 2024, which is slightly better than plan benchmarks. Since writing this analysis, MSRP also provided corrected figures for fiscal 2023, which shows that that performance was comparable to benchmarks. So the bold language where we asked them to comment on it compared to fiscal 23, they can no longer need the part on fiscal 2023, solely just a testimony on their recent performance. In conclusion, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, as you can see on page 8, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, sir, for the analysis. Any questions for the analyst? Let's bring Ms. Bell up, Director. And I think she has Ms. Smith with her. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Good afternoon, Chair Barnes and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Rhonda Bell, Executive Director of the Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans. I'm happy to be with you today, and with me is our Deputy Executive Director and Chief Financial Officer, Nakia Smith. We do extend our thanks to our analyst, Jacob Cash, for a very thorough analysis and all his hard work. We are appreciative of the fact that he does concur with the governor's budget allowance, and we have submitted written testimony, so we're here to answer any questions you might have and are happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Director Bell or team? Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Bell, it's nice to see you.
Yes.
I think you probably know what I'm going to ask you about, and just wanted to preface with I appreciate the speed in which you responded, and I know the treasurer is not here, but he was really helpful, as was Ms. Gothrop. Just wondering if you can sort of walk through the missed deduction that many folks potentially in this room and in other parts of state government missed at the end of the year the solution. And then I'm also, one of the things that I was particularly concerned about is the fact that despite this decision being made, employees were literally notified the day that it went into effect, right? This decision was made, the decision to change the deduction for state employees for December was made earlier in the year, but the notice didn't go out until literally December 31st, long before anybody could make any changes to it.
So as you and I discussed previously, this was something that was wholly resting in central payroll. It was not a decision made by MSRP. We had no visibility into their process. And really, central payroll would be the best agency to answer any detailed questions you might have on that, because I found out that there was a misdeduction pretty much the same time you did. And as soon as I did find out, I reached out to central payroll. We set up a meeting, and they came up with the solution that should have been sent out to all of the benefit analysts, I should say, for the state of Maryland. So the decision was made by central payroll to do that. Unfortunately, they did not communicate with me and my staff, nor Nationwide, our plan administrator. So we basically were playing catch up once we found out. And my understanding is that they did reach out to everyone who was affected, and I believe it was maybe 50 legislators. I'm not positive. I don't have that in front of me. But I believe everyone received direct communication from central payroll, as well as your respective HR benefit coordinators and directors.
I appreciate that. And I know there were I've talked to other state personnel in other agencies who missed similar deductions. I mean, the issue may not be quite as big for them because they get paid every 2 weeks. I guess, and I'm happy to follow up. I know we haven't had a chance to have that meeting. I guess the one piece that I am concerned with is I understand that this was a central payroll decision, but you as the agency executive director, it seems like there needs to be a better communication system between you and central payroll so that information, those kind of decisions cannot be made without your team knowing it. Because
absolutely.
At the end of the day,
yeah,
you're the ones who are managing the withdrawal of the state employee funds into these plans.
Well, I would say that the withdrawal of funds is directly on central payroll. That is not an MSRP function. We don't have any visibility into that administrative function. But I will tell you that I did have a meeting with central payroll's executive director, and I made it very clear that we need to be made aware of anything like that going forward. And we do have a plan in place to make sure this does not happen again.
Great. Well, I would very much appreciate seeing that plan, and I know we're going to try to set up a meeting to go into that a little bit deeper. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Director Powell, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
All right, we're going to move into DPS, CS, Community Supervision. Ms. Barber, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Catherine Barber. Today I will be presenting the fiscal 2026 budget analysis for DPS-CS Community Supervision. The fiscal 26 budget totals $139.7 million, which is an increase of $3.8 million or 2.8% from the working appropriation. Exhibit 1 on page 3 provides an overview of the major spending areas. Personnel expenses for the 1,186 regular positions in community supervision total $124 million, or 89% of the allowance. The allowance increases, like I said, by $3.8 million from the working appropriation, and this breakdown of the change is shown in Exhibit 2 on page 4. Under regular personnel, there's an increase of $8.8 million, mainly for new salaries and fringe benefits related to 34 new positions. Costs also increase for contractual sex offender monitoring services, motor vehicle operations, and various equipment, supplies, and materials due to inflation and a post-pandemic rise in the number of community supervision cases. Moving on to personnel. Of the 34 new regular positions provided in the allowance, half are the result of contractual conversions of DPP office support positions, and the other half are transfers from other areas of DPSES, also for support purposes. Community supervision is operating with lower vacancy rates than budgeted in the working appropriation and the allowance, which translates to an estimated shortfall of $2.76 million in fiscal '25 and $2.53 million in fiscal '26. However, this funding can be realigned by budget amendment as other areas of DPSES have higher vacancy rates than budgeted. As of December 2024, the agent vacancy rate was 7.9%, which is shown in Exhibit 3 on page 7. The first issue I'd like to highlight today regards the DPP response to the tragic murder of 6-year parole agent Davis Martinez on May 31st, 2024. At the time of Agent Martinez's death, agents were issued ballistic vests and pepper spray. DPSES has since ordered multi-threat vests for agents and placed armed guards in DPP offices across the state. These measures are funded in the budget using fiscal 2025 deficiency appropriations of $743,000 for the vests and $1.5 million for the armed guards. Furthermore, DPP agents' phones will be equipped with tracking technology that informs supervisors of their location during work hours. The terms of use are still being bargained with AFSCME representatives. The budget also contains $429,000 for body-worn cameras contingent on the enactment of legislation allowing their use. According to DPSES, conversations with the union about incorporating these cameras and other equipment like firearms are still underway. Agent Martinez's murder also led DPSES to suspend home visits by parole agents. At the time of writing this analysis, it has been approximately 8 months since parole agents conducted home visits, including with registered sex offenders. Agents have been in contact with offenders through in-person office meetings and video calls, and DPSES stated that since the suspension of home visits, critical need contacts and absconder home visits are being completed by DPSES's Warrant and Apprehension Unit, Intel and Investigation Division, and DPP Safety Support Specialists. DPSES also reported that it does not intend to resume home visits until it can re-equip and retrain its agents. Currently, Senate Bill 197 and House Bill 123 are seeking to expand membership of the Correctional Training Commission to include the Director of Parole and Probation, which would allow DPP to expand its access to resources as it approaches the retraining of its agents. DPSES has also stated that it's in the process of strengthening its risk assessment tools and safety protocols, including the possibility of having police officers accompany agents on home visits. Current policy is for agents and their supervisors to decide when to engage with law enforcement on a case-by-case basis, but DPSES is working toward establishing a memorandum of understanding with local law enforcement agencies about an escort policy. A 90-day pilot program with Montgomery County Police Department is beginning this month. Should this policy go into effect, the amount of time to conduct a home visit will likely increase, potentially leading to additional caseload challenges. This policy would also require significant coordination with law enforcement agencies and could produce obstacles related to personnel, scheduling, and other resources for both DPP and local law enforcement. Finally, an internal investigation by DPSES published in June 2024 concluded that there was no evidence that Agent Martinez violated any policies, and DPSES found no definitive answer regarding how his death could have been prevented. Since then, DPSES has agreed to an independent investigation after union representatives and committee members expressed concerns about the validity of that investigation. DLS recommends restricting $150,000 in general funds pending a report on DPSES's strategy to improve the safety of community supervision agents. The associated budget language can be found in the recommended action section on page 13. The second issue I'd like to discuss regards agent caseloads, which remain high. Exhibit 4 on page 10 shows the total number of cases supervised in each category. The total number of cases during fiscal 2024 was 85,343, which was a 3% increase, driven by a rise in the number of individuals on probation. Of those cases, approximately 34,000 were actively monitored by agents. The American Parole and Probation Association, or APA, provides guidelines for ratios depending on the risk level of clients. DLS calculated that the recommended caseload ratio for Maryland's agents is approximately 7 cases per agent using those metrics. Exhibit 5 on page 11 shows the average cases per agent by region compared to a calculation of the recommended caseload. All regions saw a decline in cases per agent in fiscal 2024. However, only 2 of the 4 regions met the recommended ratio, which differs depending on the region. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that the annual report on DPP caseloads for parole and probation agents be submitted by September 15, 2025. This recommendation appears on the bottom of page 13 in the recommended action section. The last issue I'll discuss regards delays to DPP's transition to a new risk assessment tool. DPP is required by statute to utilize an evidence-based risk assessment tool to classify individuals brought under its supervision. The agents working for DPP have used 2 main tools in the past, the Initial Risk Screener, or IRS, and the Level of Service Inventory Revised, or the LSIR. In fiscal 2021 through 2024, DPS contracted 2 separate studies to assess which of its tools effectively predicted recidivism and which needed to be replaced or updated. The major recommendations were that DPP should update or replace all of its tools, and while it's doing that, they should replace the LSIR and DDMP risk assessments with the IRS tool, which was deemed an effective predictor of recidivism. Finally, the contractor recommended that DPP should expend more time and resources on training its staff to administer and score risk assessments accurately. DPP has incorporated recommendations related to the usage of existing tools and had initially planned to select a new tool by the end of fiscal 2024, but personnel changes led to delays, and as of November 2024, DPP has not implemented any new tools. DPP stated that it will not select a new tool until it can complete a comprehensive review of the findings and recommendations in the studies. There has been no timeline reported for that. Meanwhile, DPP continues to use the IRS as the primary tool for determining supervision levels for all general supervision and drinking driver monitor cases. Effective January 1st, 2025, DPP mandated 40 hours of annual community supervision training, including training on how to administer these risk assessments properly. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that the annual report on the implementation of new DPP risk assessment tools be submitted by September 1st, 2025. This recommendation appears on page 14. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the very thorough analysis. Are there questions for the analyst? Okay. Secretary, would you come on up, bring your team? Denise, I missed you. Ms. Gilmore, I missed you on supplemental retirement. So would it be okay if I let you come up at the end of this presentation? Okay, sorry about that, but we'll make sure you have an opportunity. Madam Secretary, welcome.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Barnes, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Carolyn J. Scruggs, and I'm the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today are Mr. Joseph Sadal, Deputy Secretary of Administration, and Yolanda Bethia, the Acting Director of the Division of Parole and Probation. The department appreciates the collaboration with the Department of Legislative Services and Ms. Barber's hard work on this analysis. I would also like to offer a thank you to our DBM analyst, Christina Jorge Tuyon, for the advice and guidance she provided during the budget submission process. As a long-term employee of the department, I'm honored to be here today testifying not just on the budget, but on behalf of the dedicated and hard-working professionals who come to work every day and uphold the mission of protecting the public, its employees, detainees, and offenders under our supervision. Community supervision is an essential component of our public safety mission. It involves many stakeholders working in collaboration with the courts and law enforcement. We are proud to work with various agencies and community partners to help people live successful lives despite the many barriers they face. DLS did not ask the department to comment on any specific issues. The department concurs with the 3 recommendations in the report. I would like to take a few minutes to update you on the progress we are making on the safety initiatives we have undertaken since I last presented in front of you. Law enforcement grade OC spray was received at the end of January, distributed to each of our 4 regions, and is currently being distributed and dispersed to all certified agents who have been trained in its use. As of today, more than 600 multi-threat vests have been ordered. To date, we have received 307 multi-threat vests, which are currently being dispersed. An additional 35 agent candidates have been hired who will be fitted for multi-threat vests during their academy, which begins in the next 2 weeks. We are actively meeting with the union related to 9 policies impacting employee safety. We have completed 2 bargaining sessions earlier this week and have 3 scheduled for next week. The Fluid Mobility app is undergoing further testing and will be fully deployed once bargaining is completed with the union. Earlier this week, a scope of work was submitted to 3 organizations agreed upon with the union for independent review of the agency's practices surrounding the death of Agent Martinez. We've conferred with the president of APA and have been advised that the guidelines are close to completion and will be accredited and audited by the American Correctional Association. In conclusion, I'm very proud of the employees of this department and the dedicated team of managers that we have, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, it's nice to see you again. Appreciate the updates on things. I had a couple of questions for you. Wanted to see, I know we've been talking about the vests since October, and appreciate the progress that that your team has made on those. My understanding is that home detention unit officers and that the warrant apprehension unit officers is about 40 plus, give or take, between those 2 units have not gotten new vests or have not gotten fitted for them. Is that accurate, or can you give me an update on that for those members of the team?
We're happy to get you a breakdown of those, but the warrant detention unit does not come under the Division of Parole and Probation. They are an entity of DPSCS, so those that were being focused. And home detention is reporting to the Office of the Commissioner, which is the Division of Corrections.
Okay, so again, it's my understanding from some of our partners that they have requested new vests, that those vests are either ill-fitting or expired. And so we obviously want to make sure that anybody in the agency,
Absolutely.
even beyond parole, is getting.
We will certainly look into that, sir.
Updated equipment. And then wanted to ask you, many of us saw the article in the Baltimore Banner earlier today and saw the MOSH from the Department of Labor, the citation that was officially made public. Can you give us an update on, there were a couple of things in there, in particular, workplace violence prevention plan, how you're going to be working on that with labor and the union, the proactive measures that you're going to be putting in place, and then the reporting real time when there's an emergency. Some of those recommendations.
My deputy's been working directly on that, so I'm going to let him update you.
Yeah, absolutely. So as the Secretary mentioned, we had those initial bargaining sessions early this week, and we started off that with a discussion regarding the MOSH citation. The department has complied with the requirements as far as posting the citation at the Silver Spring office. And one of the things we're trying to do within all of these bargaining sessions, because we believe the policies that are currently being discussed are the things that would meet the requirement for the abatement with MOSH, and trying to ensure that the information within the MOSH citation colors the conversation, where our policies are going and how we can ensure a safe workplace.
I think we all want to make sure that there's, I think, regular updates for us on how that is going forward. And then the last question that I've got for you, I'm going to put on my joint audits co-chair hat here and appreciate that your team sent updated information after the joint audit hearing that we had in December around the health contract. And one of the things that you gave us we asked for monthly reports on the staffing vacancies within the Centurion contract for healthcare. And in the report that we got back in January, it said that Centurion is essentially 30%, has a 30% vacancy rate. So they're not hitting their staffing level that's in the contract. You said you thought they might be able to get to 85% by March. They're supposed to be at 90. So I'm assuming that January, February, March, we're looking at potentially 3 months, at least 3 months of liquidated damages in the contract. So I'm curious if you know how much that's going to be. And then obviously 85% is still not 90%. Can you give us an update? We haven't gotten obviously this month's staffing report yet from your team. Where are they in the staffing level? What are those liquidated damages going to look like? And what's the plan past March?
Thank you. Yes, so, I'm sorry. Thank you again for that question. Centurion right now is approximately at 76%. They do have a number of individuals that are going through credentialing to ensure that they are appropriate fit for the jobs that we need them to do. The company did advise us by March 1, they will be at 85%. And as you stated, the contract does say 90%. And we will assess those liquidated damages. We have an auditing unit that is looking at that now. My Assistant Secretary of Programs, Treatment and Reentry Services maintains that data for me, and we're happy to forward that to your office as well.
Great. I think the sooner you can get us a number on what those liquidated damages look like, the better.
Well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Secretary. Great to see you. I wanted to touch on the risk assessment tool delay. And I wanted to first ask you would agree that the risk assessment tool, that process, is not just about recidivism and estimating when a supervisee or the level of potential recidivism, but also their level of potential threat, their level of potential danger that they present, or lack thereof. Would that be accurate?
That is accurate, sir.
Okay. And so I'm a little concerned about the delay, and I had a couple of questions about that. There was the study, the independent study that was done over the 3-year period. When did that study end?
So it was extended to this month, to February. But the other thing that we're looking at are the guidelines that are coming out from APA to help us with some of that risk assessment as well. And if we want to talk more in detail, the director can actually give you some updates on the risk assessment tool.
Okay, but we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
If it hasn't ended, when did the first recommendations come to you all about replacing the IRS and the LSIR tools? When was that first given to you? So
I believe that the original risk assessment started prior to my administration. It was in 21.
I know, from 21 to 24 was when it's noted in the report, but there were recommendations in the report, and I'm trying to figure out when DPSCS received those recommendations.
I don't have that exact date for you, but I will find out unless the director is aware.
Okay. In the report, it states that you guys had intended to replace the risk assessment tools by the end of fiscal year 24.
Correct.
So it would be fair to say that you got those recommendations prior to that.
Well, part of the problem with us not being able to complete the risk assessment is because there were some challenges with staff that had not met with the analysts. staff did not understand the need to meet with the analysts and why it would help them and help us better understand their caseloads. So we had to go back and educate staff that it was important to keep these meetings that were being scheduled with those analysts because this was to support them. And that's why we did that extension, so that those staff that they had missed, that they did not talk to, they were able to go back and have further conversation with.
Okay. And that's a little confusing because in the report it talks about the personnel changes that caused the delay. And I thought that that was about a leadership position that had changed, which was now allowing you all to do a comprehensive review of the recommendations made by the independent
So
study.
when the interim team came in, everything continued. The personnel change, there was 2 personnel changes at the top, the director and the deputy, that did not have a direct impact on this because the interim person that came in was aware of that and she did move forward with it prior to Ms. Bethia.
Okay. I'm sorry that this
I
is
hear you.
confusing because it literally says in the report that it was a personnel change at a leadership position and that you all are not able to make a recommendation for replacing this very important risk assessment that also deals not only with recidivism, but as we've already stated, the safety or lack thereof.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding you. Are you referring to the personnel action that happened in June of last year, or are you referring to the personnel action referring to Ms. Bethia coming on?
And
that's not clear in the report.
What I'm trying to figure out is there is a independent risk assessment revalidation study, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And there has been no replacement of the risk assessment tools that study said should be replaced, correct?
Correct, you're correct.
And in the report that we have, it says the reason why there's been no recommendation and no replacement for that tool is because of a personnel change.
I would challenge.
Is that
Are you aware of
incorrect?
that? Yeah. Go ahead.
Apologies. We've got a lot of reports, as you can imagine,
Yeah.
going on in the agency right now, so there might be some confusion. We have the recommendations. We're actively trying at this point to identify what that looks like and looking through the, labyrinthine procurement process the state often has in order to try and acquire that. But I know the director and I had discussions about that today with the secretary about what the best methodology to actually get some sort of an acquisition of an appropriate tool would be. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
A bit more. And,
We'll get there.
And there was no timeline established on the replacement of the risk assessment tool. Does that mean that there now is a timeline for that?
I think we're actively working on it. As far as a timeline, one of the things that we're looking at right now is, given the scale and complexity of any sort of procurement, what kind of timeline that looks like. There's multiple different procurement methods that we could talk about as far as how to go about doing that. And we're looking at whatever option will allow us to both follow all applicable laws while simultaneously getting this product as soon as possible.
Let me just say, we're a little better with timelines here. We're going to give you 1 week timeline to get us a timeline. How's that?
All right. Timeline.
Is that good, Delegate?
Thank you. And I agree with you, Mr. Chair. This is very concerning. The time is of the essence. And I'm sure the chair of our Public Safety Committee has some questions about the May 3rd timeline that you guys are going to be on based on the article that the good Delegate Solomon brought up, which is extremely troubling about the unacceptable workplace standards that have been found by the Labor Department. So I think that is right on point, and I apologize for being heavy-handed, but this is, I think, a major issue that needs to be addressed immediately.
We appreciate your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Madam Secretary and team, thank you guys for coming. I do have a couple questions I want to follow up with my colleagues. Going back to what was reported in the banner, as well as Fox 45 on the Department of Labor citation. First thing I wanted to confirm that you said that the citation has been posted publicly for all the workers to see. That has been done already? Okay, that's great to hear. And the recommendations in there from the Workplace Violence Prevention Program, engineering controls for office safety, and the admin controls to materially reduce workplace violence. I believe it was March 3rd was the date. Will you all be able to make that timeline based on the recommendations that they suggested?
Well, I think that's one of the discussions we're going to have with Department of Labor is we believe, and I think they agree as well, that the discussions we're having with AFSCME regarding the different policies in place are a large portion of that abatement. And we're confident that during those discussions, they will either provide some sort of an extension, because obviously bargaining, we have a very great sense of urgency in ensuring that these policies are put in place. But we're going to have ongoing discussions with Department of Labor and try to get this resolved as soon as possible, of course.
I know you all will, and I implore you to, because I did have opportunity to read the citation. And over the last several months, we have been talking, of course, about the tragic death of Agent Martinez and the immediate effect. But one of the things that was kind of concerning to me was references to agents and staff being exposed to threats and assaults, such as being, at least a threat to be shot, punched, kicked, stabbed, strangled, bit. And I think it was inferred that these things occurred in the office. So, I know in the budget, we are asking for security in our field offices, which is great to see. But if there's a pattern of clients coming into the workplace and threatening, I think some of the things that was listed is how we reconfigured the desk such that folks can't come across and use items as a weapon against. I mean, that's, this is tough work that they do. But that's terrifying, and I know you all know that, but to read it, I think just put some particulars to the situation that I think the frontline staff are experiencing. And I just strongly encourage you guys to work expeditiously with that, as I know you will do. I did also have a question as it related to home visits and when we will restart that and whatnot. A couple of the agents who testified before talked about how when they did those home visits, they were able to see things that, one, exposed them to risk, but also allowed us to protect the public, right? And I just want to know if you can clarify your position and strategy as relates to restarting home visits.
Sure. Again, we will not begin or resume home visits fully until I am sure that everyone has been trained through defense tactics and everyone has been fitted and received their vests. We will continue to do those that are mandated by the Interstate Compact. Those are our absconder visits, and that's our warrant apprehension unit that continues to do those for us. But we will certainly phase them in, understanding that home visits are done at various levels. So our higher level individuals that need those home visits, as we start to ensure that our agents that are certified with the OC spray have a vest, can partner with law enforcement, certainly in areas like Baltimore City where we have an MOU, and Montgomery County where we're doing a pilot. We will start to phase those visits in. But again, reminding you that we learned a lot from COVID, because during COVID, we were not out in the community. So there are things that an agent can see virtually, using a virtual experience, scanning a person's house, if it's a sex offender, seeing that there's a child in the background. So those things are beneficial as well. And we'll continue to keep our agents safe until each of them have also been made aware through the bargaining that we're doing with the union of the 9 policies that we're going through, because each of them have a safety component to them.
Okay, so just clarifying, because we've talked also about partnerships with local law enforcement. So I'm reading back to you to make sure I'm clear, which is for the home visits, we are leveraging technology where it makes sense, particularly for the lower risk folks. But for the higher risk folks, we are prioritizing the partnership. We're going to be fitting our agents with the needed security for their safety, but also we're prioritizing partnerships with local law enforcement to go with them.
And local law enforcement, as well as our warrant apprehension unit that has always been available to go with them, because they are commissioned law enforcement officers.
And those commissioned law enforcement, they are able to have a firearm.
Yes, they carry a firearm.
Because we talked about that before. I just wanted to clarify. Okay. One of the other things, a couple other quick things, Mr. Chair. So I know we said that the partnership or the pilot with Montgomery County was going to start this month. We are a week into that. I'm just wondering, how is that going so far? Have they actually started any interactions?
Director Pavia, you want to speak to that?
We actually start on the 12th of this month.
Okay. All right, we'd love to hear how that is going, if you can keep us regularly updated. I know not just for the agents, but a lot of my colleagues would love, particularly those from Montgomery County. And when we look at those ratios, of course, those of us in the capital region, in the western part of the state, see that the caseload ratios are a lot higher. And I know you spoke to that, but we just really want to make sure that we're just not being left behind, and that with those high ratios, it's hard for the agents to get to everyone adequately. And we want to make sure we're protecting our folks. So if you could speak a little bit more to particularly how are we going to address the high caseloads for those in the capital region and the western part of the state, which was a lot higher.
So in our current academy that begins on the 21st of this month, we have 14 new hires that are going specifically to the capital region to address those caseloads.
Yeah, and I think generally, as the analyst identified, the vacancy rate for the department is fairly low. And as y'all are well aware, there's additional funding within the budget for what we believe is around 60 additional pins. And we have this caseload study ongoing, which I think will give us hopefully a lot of information and allow us to analyze based on the regions and the different areas where the need for any additional pins needs to focus, right?
I appreciate that. The last thing I'll say, Mr. Chair, is as I shared with you all yesterday at our public safety, I served on the Maryland Police Standards and Training Commission for a while, and I was there while we were working on all the body-worn camera policy language. And as you all are pursuing piloting that and scaling that for them, I would just make sure you all are asking for the resources for training. I know this is in discussion with AFSCME, but make sure it's in this, you have the appropriate training for the staff, because what has happened in practice for our police force is that many of them who are most resistant is just because they don't know how to use it appropriately. So they're afraid that it's going to be a tool for discipline against them as opposed to something to help protect them. And then, I know you know this, but I have to stress it because we've seen it on the ground with folks resisting. And just, to put it out there for those who follow, body-worn cameras typically, in court of law more often protect law enforcement as opposed to holding them accountable. The worst of the worst are held accountable, but disproportionately. So if this can, in the case of, in a manual Sewell, for example, if you're in there, you have the body-worn camera, it builds accountability for the other person that may shift their behavior a little bit and hopefully help save some lives. So thank you.
Thank you, Subcommittee Chair.
I do think in order to, look, Madam Secretary, in order to achieve a goal, you have to set a goal. So I think in addition to the timelines that Delegate Ruff was talking about, we really need to know when you anticipate to return to home visits. And so I think that's something you should get us, right? Not just we want to get the vests. When is that going to be? What do you anticipate those timelines? So I'm not going to set another specific hearing here today, but we're going to have a hearing because we have a bill. So we would expect that you will be at that hearing and not only addressing that bill, but addressing these things as well and continuing to give us progress on those things. And then we'll have your budget in about 5 or 6 weeks. So we want to have an eye toward that. I know the subcommittee chair will continue to be working with you as well as the personnel subcommittee chair. And we'll get there. Any other questions for the secretary? Okay, thanks for being with us. We do have a couple of witnesses. I'd ask you to stay for them as well. Renika Robinson, and I guess David McDonald's not with us. Renika, Ms. Robinson, welcome. And we finish, then we'll get back to you. Okay, Denise?
Thank you, and good afternoon. So my name is Renika Robinson. I'm the proud president of AFSCME Local 3661, representing Community Corrections. And as many of you have heard me speak at multiple hearings, I'm here today to bring the same message. We do appreciate the budget. We do appreciate that the budget includes a modest increase in the number of positions, but we do still need more. We need more agents, monitors, and support staff. In Silver Spring, we have some sex offender agents who are reporting over 180 cases assigned to them. We have some general agents who are reporting over 440. And we also have drinking and driving monitors who are reporting over 430 cases. Short staffing is not unique to our Silver Spring office, as we do get reports of high caseloads in areas like Cumberland and other offices across the state. In Cumberland, a general caseload agent said they have over 270 cases. And we still have agents and monitors performing the duties of our support staff, like answering the phones and directing clients as they report into the office. So we need lower caseloads, and we also need workload analysis so that we can accurately report the work that we're doing. It's important for us to evaluate our workload and to understand that a sex offender caseload is different from a domestic violence caseload in terms of workload, and that cases that are in statuses that aren't considered active still require us to do work. And then we also need to create solutions to be proactive about monitoring our safety in real time when we are in the field. The current policy we have to get us back in the field, it relies on our cell phones and sending text messages to supervisors, and our supervisors checking those phones every 30 minutes. We need proactive measures that will allow us to report emergencies in real time. So we need panic buttons or radios that we can use to get those signals out. So we ask that legislators just support a budget that allow us to get the resources we need to uphold public safety while being safe. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the work you've been doing on behalf of the employees at Public Safety. Any questions? Okay, we'll see you at the bill hearing soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go back really quick to supplemental pensions, and again, apologize to Denise Gilmore for missing her. She signed up unfavorable for supplemental pensions, so we're going to see. Our 26th member, welcome.
Thank you. Very funny. Good afternoon, Chair Barnes and members of the Appropriations Committee. I promise I'll be very quick. And I want to just be clear, we are not, in opposition to the governor's allowance to the supplemental plan. We just take issue with the analysis, actually. The bottom of page 4, there was an assumption that the agency's enrollment would increase based on a departmental bill that they are pushing this year that would auto-enroll new hires into the supplemental plan. We think that's a policy decision. Separately, we're opposed to auto-enrollment. The teachers are opposed to auto-enrollment. State AFL-CIO is opposed to auto-enrollment. So we just would want to separate that policy decision out from the budget, ideally. We were a little disappointed to see that included in the assumption. That's it. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Okay, thanks for being with us. I apologize again. Have a good weekend. All right, committee, we are adjourned. Have a good weekend.